What you are about to hear is a story about a visit that was supposed to stay quiet and did not. A story about phones collected at the door, a warning about consequences, tea that lasted less than an hour, and a question that nobody in the official framing of this story wants to answer directly. Was this a family reunion, or was it a managed diplomatic encounter designed to look like considerably more than it actually was? Hello friends, my name is James, and you are watching Royal Daily Report, your #1 source for the most exclusive and most shocking royal stories on the internet. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because tonight we are working through one of the most eventful and most revealing weeks in the entire Sussex saga, in the specific order it actually happened, because the sequence here matters more than any individual detail sitting inside it. And if you have been with us from the beginning, you already know we never hold back. We never pull back. Let us get into it. And before we go one single word further, if you are not subscribed to Royal Daily Report, you are missing the most complete royal analysis anywhere on the internet right now. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on those notifications, because this story is still developing, and what comes next could be even more significant than what we are covering tonight. Subscribe now. Let us get into it. There is a particular kind of embarrassment that happens when you put real effort into keeping something quiet, and the exact opposite occurs, almost immediately. And that is roughly what unfolded last week, when Meghan slipped back into Britain, expecting the entire visit to stay genuinely contained, only to find the BBC and People magazine already running coverage within hours of her actual arrival on the ground. One comment underneath that coverage summed up the irony better than any commentator managed. A meeting so private they apparently had to issue a press release to every major outlet on the planet just to announce it existed. Close to 900 people liked that specific comment, and it raises the first question worth sitting with before we get into anything else. Who actually leaked news of this supposedly private visit in the first place? The palace denied being the source. Sussex representatives denied it just as firmly. But there is a precedent here that a lot of people following this story seem to have forgotten. During an earlier and widely discussed palace leak, journalist Charlotte Griffiths later revealed publicly who had actually briefed her, and according to her own account, it was not palace staff at all. It was Harry and Meghan's own PR team. Critics looking at this latest leak say it reads like the exact same playbook running again. A story gets pushed out and promoted first, generating exactly the coverage intended. And only afterward does public frustration circle back and land on the king's staff as the presumed culprit. Subscribe to Royal Daily Report right now, because the 7 days leading up to this visit, and why that context changes how the entire thing reads, is coming right now. Hit that button. Turn on those notifications. Subscribe now. A full 7 days before Meghan's quiet return, Harry had already lost what a considerable number of commentators are now calling the defining legal battle of his entire adult life. His case against the Daily Mail's publisher, 400 pages of judgment, and an outcome that did not go his way. The judge specifically flagged that portions of his argument leaned on assumption rather than solid evidence. What followed the ruling generated its own separate storm. Reported settlement talks that the Mail apparently declined before trial, according to Telegraph reporting, and then Harry's public statement afterward, calling the verdict a whitewash. Costs on both sides were floated as high as $50 million combined. A figure alone significant enough that it would have comfortably dominated headlines for days, even without everything else that followed it. The Mail's legal team reportedly challenged Harry's allegations point by point, with a level of preparation that ultimately overwhelmed his own side's case. And then exactly 3 days after that public statement went out, reports began emerging that Harry had sat down for tea with his own father at Highgrove, and that is genuinely where this story becomes considerably more interesting than a simple family reunion narrative. Subscribe to Royal Daily Report right now, because the specific logistics of this visit, who was or was not offered accommodation where Harry actually ended up, and what the structure of the meeting reportedly looked like, is the detail that tells you something considerably more honest than the warm official framing being put out publicly. Subscribe. Hit that button. Turn on those notifications. Subscribe now. Harry had apparently expected to stay at Buckingham Palace, the way he reportedly had in the past. According to commentator Neil Sean, citing palace sources, what he actually got back was closer to a flat no. Sean's phrasing was that there was essentially no room at the inn. Harry ended up at a private members' club instead. Windsor was never even on the table, according to several commentators, including Sean, who claimed William specifically did not want that arrangement happening. None of this has been confirmed officially, but it set a fairly cold tone before anyone had even sat down for tea. The meeting itself, according to separate accounts from multiple commentators, reportedly lasted under an hour in total, despite the genuinely long transatlantic journey involved in simply getting there. One reading was that serving tea signaled something deliberately brief and formal rather than emotionally significant. Several other details circulated about how it was structured. Phones reportedly collected from everyone beforehand for privacy and security reasons. Harry reportedly meeting Charles alone first, while Meghan and the children waited separately. Camilla reportedly present throughout, despite Harry having preferred she not be there, given the well-documented tension between them, stemming partly from comments in his memoir. Supporters read her presence as loyalty to her husband. Others read it differently. Either way, it became one of the most discussed specific details of the whole encounter. Whatever photographs exist from the visit reportedly stay entirely under Crown control. Nothing headed for Netflix, nothing for social media, and according to multiple commentators, there was apparently a direct warning attached. Leak details from this meeting, and there would be real consequences. One commentator called it the Last Chance Saloon. Subscribe to Royal Daily Report right now, because the specific comparison that a lot of commentators keep returning to, the one that changes how you read the warmth being projected around this entire visit, is the most important part of tonight's story. Subscribe now. Hit that button. Turn on those notifications. Subscribe now. While Meghan was reportedly having tea with the king, a father on the other side of the world was being discussed in a completely different context. Thomas Markle spent years working long hours as a television lighting director, and by multiple accounts, poured meaningful time and money into his daughter's early career. Private schooling, acting classes, opportunities that a lot of people believe genuinely shaped the path that eventually led her into public life. He is in his 80s now, has survived heart attacks and a stroke, lost part of a leg, and has reportedly never once met his own grandchildren or Harry in person. Meghan reportedly flew more than 11 hours across an ocean specifically to see Harry's father this particular week. Thomas Markle, by comparison, lives roughly a 2-hour flight away from Montecito, a distance that would fit comfortably inside a single afternoon. That gap is the detail a lot of commentators keep returning to, and one comment captured the sentiment about as sharply as anything circulating this week. One grandfather is a king, the other is a retired man with no title, and only one of them gets visited. Another commenter put it more bluntly still. They will not visit Thomas Markle because he is not rich. A striking number of viewers, many describing their own experience with family estrangement, as grandparents themselves keep asking some version of the same question. What does it mean when support given for years simply stops being returned once health starts failing? Now, Back to the palace side of this story, because William's position deserves its own separate attention. Reports suggest William reportedly found out about the Highgrove meeting the exact same way the general public eventually did, through media coverage circulating publicly rather than through any advance notice or heads up from within his own family, which is itself a fairly significant detail worth sitting with. The timing made that worse rather than better. While Charles was reportedly meeting the Sussexes, William and Catherine were attending a charity polo event, carrying on with scheduled public duties as though nothing else was happening. Multiple reports describe William as genuinely caught off guard, and commentators continue to say he has no current appetite for any private meeting with his brother. Part of that, critics argue, traces back to specific things Harry has said publicly about William over the years, including references to hair loss in the memoir, compounded by online commentary from some Sussex supporters that added pressure during a period when Catherine was dealing with cancer treatment and needed space rather than scrutiny. Subscribe to Royal Daily Report right now, because the theory about what actually triggered this meeting and whose phone call reportedly made it happen is the most surprising element in this entire story, and most channels have not fully examined it. Subscribe now. Hit that button, turn on those notifications, subscribe now. Why did this specific meeting happen now, after such a long and apparently deliberate stretch of distance between father and son? Neil Sean has a specific theory, and it does not center on Harry at all. According to Sean, Meghan personally called the palace the night before, explaining that Harry was deeply shaken by the court ruling and needed to speak with his father urgently, and that call in Sean's account is what actually moved things forward. If accurate, that reframes the entire meeting in a way worth sitting with. It suggests Charles's apparent willingness to open the door was less about his own initiative and considerably more about responding to a direct, urgent appeal from Meghan specifically, a woman who throughout most of this saga has been positioned publicly as reluctant to engage with the institution at all. If she really did make that call, it complicates the simpler narrative, where Harry alone drives every decision about reconciliation, and Meghan simply follows along or stays away. Set that account against something PR expert Jackie Vore separately said this same week in comments that generated their own considerable wave of attention. "I have a horrible feeling," she said, "that we are seeing a breakdown in plain sight." Vore pointed to a consistent pattern of shifting public messaging, plans that seem to change from one statement to the next without real explanation, and described Harry's reaction to unfavorable coverage as something close to throwing his toys out of the pram. There is one specific detail threading consistently through the entire court case and everything that followed it. Meghan was reportedly never once seen standing publicly beside Harry at any appearance directly connected to the proceedings, from the opening of the trial through to the final verdict and its aftermath. That absence has fed real speculation that the couple may simply disagree on how to handle these legal fights, with some claiming Meghan grew tired of the lawsuits years before Harry did. None of that is confirmed. But it is exactly why some commentators have started asking more openly than before how aligned these two people actually are on the fundamental decisions shaping their public life together. A wife's absence during her husband's worst public week in years is the kind of detail that people notice even when they cannot fully explain what it means. If you want the historical reference point that a genuinely large number of commentators keep circling back to throughout all of this, it is not William at all. It is Queen Elizabeth herself, and specifically what she firmly established years earlier at the Sandringham Summit. No half-in, half-out arrangement of any kind. You were a working royal or you were not one. Full stop. A lot of commentators are now openly asking whether this week's meeting represents a quiet departure from that line she drew so firmly. There is a reason commentators keep coming back to Elizabeth in this specific context, rather than treating her as a passing historical footnote. She was the one member of this family who consistently prioritized institutional coherence over individual comfort, even when that meant disappointing people she loved. The Sandringham line was not cruelty. By most accounts, it was an attempt to protect the very structure that makes any of this family's public roles sustainable in the first place. Watching that specific line apparently soften even slightly under a different king raises questions that go well beyond any single family visit. The public reaction gives you a genuine sense of how divided this entire situation actually remains. One self-described lifelong monarchist wrote that she no longer supports the monarchy after this. Another comment, considerably sharper, argued Charles was being reckless, given everything Harry and Meghan reportedly put the late Queen and Prince Philip through. That comment alone drew roughly 400 agreements. People still remember Philip's final months, the pandemic-era funeral, the years of interviews and public accusations that unfolded while Elizabeth was still alive. Subscribe to Royal Daily Report right now because what is allegedly being discussed for later this summer, a possible Balmoral invitation Christmas at Sandringham, the question of whether William and Catherine would skip the traditional Christmas walk entirely if the Sussexes joined it, is all coming in our next video. And you need to be subscribed to get every single update as this develops. Subscribe now. Hit that button. Turn on those notifications. Subscribe now. There is something worth naming plainly before we close. Every single element of this story describes an institution that has learned through hard and repeated experience to treat every interaction with the Sussexes as a potential leak waiting to happen. The quiet visit that became global news within hours, the tea that lasted less than an hour, the phones collected at the door, the warning about consequences. That is not how families that trust each other operate. It is how organizations manage risk. Whether that caution is fully justified by the historical record, or whether it has become its own kind of self-fulfilling coldness, is a genuinely fair question to sit with. Sit with the specific detail of the phones being collected for a moment, because I think it captures something the rest of the story only implies. A family that trusted each other would not need that measure. An institution managing a known risk absolutely would. Whichever one this actually was, and it may well have been some uneasy combination of both. The fact that precaution was apparently built into the meeting from the very start tells you something honest about where things currently stand. Whatever the warmer version of events being circulated afterward would prefer you to believe, what you actually have here, once you strip away the individual headlines and lay everything out in the order it genuinely happened, is one extraordinarily dense and eventful week. A quiet visit that became global news within hours, despite every apparent effort to keep it contained. A brother relationship that shows no meaningful sign of thawing, regardless of what happens between Harry and their father individually. An aging father who, by every available account, is still genuinely hoping for something real and lasting, with a son he currently only gets to see for less than an hour at a stretch, under conditions that read considerably more like a managed diplomatic encounter than a family reunion in any ordinary sense of that phrase. A phone number for a liaison officer where a protective operation might have been, a 40-page report and a 1-hour tea, and an aging man in his 80s, 2 hours away from Montecito, who has never met his grandchildren, sitting entirely outside the narrative of a week built around themes of family healing and second chances. That is the full picture. That is the week as it actually happened, and now you have it. That is all for tonight, friends. I am James, and this has been Royal Daily Report. If this story hit different for you tonight, hit that like button right now. Subscribe if you have not already, and turn on those notifications, because we are here every single week with the complete picture that other channels skip past. Share this tonight with everyone you know who follows this story, because this is the analysis they cannot afford to miss. Subscribe now. Tell 5 friends. I will see you in the next one. Until then, stay informed, stay curious, and stay royal. Goodbye, friends.